Facilities that make this program possible are provided by the City of Highland Park. Programs are produced independently by members of the community. The City of Highland Park is not affiliated with the following program or the producers of public access programming and is not responsible for the content. The following program does not reflect the opinions of the City of Highland Park.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Dotson, and I'm your host for Poetry Today. I am really thrilled to have Cynthia Gallagher, a Chicago-based poet and playwright. She's the author of 3 poetry collections and 2 chapbooks. Most recently, she made a 10-city book tour with her nonfiction guide and memoir, Frugal Poet's Guide to Life: How to Live a Poetic Life Even If You Aren't a Poet, which won a National Indie Excellence Award. And the Chicago Public Library lists Cynthia among their top 10 requested Chicago poets. Well, thank you so much for driving up from the city to come and join me today on Poetry Today. And I'm really excited to talk about your book. This is sounds like a very interesting premise.
Well, thank you, Jennifer. I'm pleased to be here, and Frugal Poet's Guide to Life is my first nonfiction book. I have a number of different books of poetry. I've been a poet for a long time. I've always lived in Chicago. And, you know, poets and creative people have to start somewhere. And you see I have a number of books, but I started actually with, and I don't know if the camera can see this, but it's a mimeographed book of poetry stapled. And that's how I started out. I got to know a lot of poets through the poetry scene in Chicago, open readings. I surrounded myself with like-minded people who and hand in hand, we helped each other. And that's how it helped me boost myself as a poet. We helped one another. And I talk about that in Frugal Poet's Guide to Life, how I started out, how I evolved, and how to form a life that, you know, I didn't want to go into debt, but I didn't want to work so hard that I didn't have time to be creative. So I talk about how to budget, live elegantly but frugally. I have tips about travel and fashion and food, and make the right choices and that for that. Superfoods, you get the most for your money, the most nutrition.
Wow.
But the book also goes into a brief history of the Chicago poetry scene from the late 20th century to the early 21st century. And I have just tips for anyone who's creative, whether they're a writer, a poet, a musician, a dancer, an artist, you name it, a quilter. How to be creative, how to avoid distractions, and really focus on what you want to do. And there's a lot of distractions today with cyberspace.
That's right. Most people would be rather talking with their thumbs.
That's right, yeah. And it is a problem, and it's a problem amongst the best writers.
Yeah.
So, and I quote those writers.
Oh, good.
And
so what are some of your writer sources that you reference in this book, or that you talk about in this book?
One was Frank Burris, who writes for Poets and Writers magazine.
Okay.
There was another, I have ancient authors. There's this Cyrus Publicus, and he wrote about being distracted, that you can't do 2 things at once, really. You can only focus on one thing at a time.
So he did not believe in multitasking.
He didn't, even back in the ancient Greek days. So.
Okay, that's good. Well, I guess, you know, since typically we focus mostly on poetry, would you like to sort of share a little bit of your poetic sensibility, maybe read a poem or 2?
Well, I'll read a poem about, since 2018, began not that long ago. I have a poem about New Year's Day, and it's really about the new year. It's a clean slate, the board washed of yesterday, a new document page, a big open space under comments. The sun rises over and outshines the fireworks display of last night, the glitter and silver of your party wear. Today lends a new brightness to snow and sand, beaches and backyards, and to all your fresh plans, even if it's a cloudy day. This year makes a resolution to be like no other year for the next 12 months. You dive bravely into its whirlwind of weeks, and later fondly remember and passionately forget red letter days and gray letter days in a black and white sort of way, but never cease to be part of this year for the rest of your life.
Wow, well, that's great, because everybody needs a little bit of hope to get enthused and motivated for now 2018.
That's right.
That's
Unlike
great.
any other year. Let's hope it's a good one.
Yes. So you've written so many poetry collections as well and chapbooks. Have you worked with a particular publisher? Or have you self-published? What was your what did you find?
One of my books, which is Swimmer's Prayer, which are poems about Chicago, ironically was published in Seattle, Washington.
Okay. All right.
At something called Missing Spoke Press.
Oh, neat.
And my other books were basically funded by the city of Chicago or the
okay.
Illinois Arts Council funding. So those came to be because of that funding.
Wonderful. Okay, great. Well, I wonder now, so do you talk about grants in the Frugal Guide?
I do, yes.
Okay.
I talk about grants, about getting your local grants or your city, your state grants, as well as grants that are available through, you can read Poets and Writers magazines. There's, if you're a not-for-profit, you might be able to get a grant, but usually the governmental grants are available to people.
So you can be an individual and not necessarily be represent a poetry organization.
That's right.
Oh, okay. Wow, that's good to know. Good to know. We'll have to read the book for all those fabulous tips. It sounds like that the tips that contained in the book really span quite a bit. You mentioned fashion and travel. What are some of the...
Also the concept of wabi-sabi.
And what's that?
Which is, if you're going to be frugal but elegant, it's a Japanese concept of being kind of things that are natural or maybe slightly broken or worn away, but celebrating those things, those natural things, not the glitz, not the Vegas, but the barn and the simple life and the simple meal and the beauty that's in nature.
Oh, wow. Okay. Very cool. You mentioned that you were never extroverted, which I can understand that because poets often you're writing by yourself most of the time, right?
Right, and I've never been that extroverted. I've never been the life of the party. I think as I grow older, I'm more outgoing. I teach yoga now, so I can teach a class and I feel comfortable. And I also taught creative writing workshops in the past. But a lot of people say that they write to express themselves. And I don't think that's really accurate. As far as I feel that I write to connect with others. Okay. And I feel that's a way that I can communicate without having to be a sparkling conversationalist or party goer.
Yeah.
The most popular person.
Right.
It's just, I want to connect.
Well, so now did you find it challenging? Because, I guess you have a theater background, but is it only as a dramatist, or did you also perform? Or?
I have a theater background as a writer.
Just as a writer,
and I've been part of musical theater groups in Chicago, writing groups, and connected with the Chicago Dramatists, and I'm writing plays and musicals now too.
Oh, very well. Do you find that your background, your long background with poetry, does that inform your writing for the stage?
I definitely think so, because the best plays are poetic.
Well,
and the best
Yeah.
dialogue can be poetic in a not in a flowery way,
Mm-hmm.
but in a very deep and meaningful way. To-
Conversely, does writing dialogue inform your poetry at all? I mean, do you find that you sometimes use dialogue in poetry?
I
or-
sometimes do, and
Okay.
I write an awful lot of narrative poems
Okay.
rather than lyric poems. So they're more story-like,
Mm-hmm.
I would say.
Yeah. I like that, Di. That's great. Well, tell me about how you discovered poetry. I mean, it sounds like it's been a friend of yours for many years. And how did you discover your interest in poetry, and what pulled you along to keep you connected to that?
I started writing when I was in my teen years. Excuse me. And I tried to submit poetry to Glamour magazine, which at the time would publish poetry.
Oh, wow.
And they published fiction, and it's totally changed now.
Yeah.
But after college, I got involved with the open readings over at Northeastern Illinois University. They had the Body Politic Theater,
Oh, wow.
had readings there. So I got involved with that. I did take one course in college in poetry writing with the poet Michael Ananaya. And my husband, Carlos Cumpian, and I are still friends with Michael. And
my
sometimes
goodness.
when we're down in Austin, we visit him. So after all these years, it's great to still have a relationship with a professor and a mentor.
Wow, yeah, that's. I wish I had been able to keep in touch with some of my professors. That's very cool. Talk to me about. Let's see. Well, what you've been at various points of the well, now theater as well, but the poetry scene. What are some highlights for you that you
Well, I
mentioned?
think some of the highlights of the poetry scene include a lot of people from out of state and even out of Chicago don't realize that the Poetry Slam started here in Chicago in the mid-'80s, the Uptown Poetry Slam at the Green Mill. And it's gone to become an international phenomenon
Yeah.
through Mark Smith. And also, Chicago is the home to the Poetry Foundation. We have the Poetry Center of Chicago. These are fantastic institutions. And also, a lot of things that take place with poetry, like the Guild Complex, have a 40-year history
Wow.
dating back to the Guild Bookstore, which was on Armitage, moved on to Lincoln, evolved into this poetry venue, and has gone on from there. So there's so many different institutions in Chicago that have evolved with the times, whereas in other cities, maybe they come and go.
Yeah. Well, I guess you've got a lot of inventive people who are willing to push the envelope and, you know, step outside the box of what is, you know, only poetry readings at the library or something like that. You know, they want to
there's a lot-
reinvent it and become creative with it.
There's a lot of non-academic poetry
Yeah.
going on, and I've never been an academic poet because I've always worked day jobs. I never taught at a university, and most of the people who I know in the poetry scene are like that.
Right. Well, yeah. You gotta need that health insurance. You know, that's very important.
And I consider the book an anti-MFA guide to being a poet.
Okay. Well, that's
So-
good. I'm glad I don't need one.
I don't think you need one to write and
good.
publish.
That's good. I had a great question, but now I've completely.
Was it about the poetry scene?
I'm having a senior moment.
Okay.
That's
It's all right.
I don't know. Oh, I know. It was about that sort of the life-work balance and.
Well, I went into I wrote for a living. I did business writing, but I could have gone with the ad agency. I used to work for an advertising agency. I could have stuck with that, but you could work, like if you watched Mad Men, you could work till like midnight on these different campaigns. You really kind of give your life over to that. And I wanted to get a job where you'd have kind of a 9 to 5, and then you have a life.
Right.
And that's what I did. And also taught workshops um, made a life for myself where I didn't have to devote 60 hours, 80 hours a week to my job.
Yeah. Well, that's important. That's great.
And I think people should look for that if they want to be creative. But still don't say, I can't be creative because I'm working all the time. You can find time for your creativity, whether it's a Wednesday night, make a date with yourself to spend 2 hours with whatever creativity you're doing. If you're writing music, if you're acting, to hone your acting skills, whatever, if you're writing, to just sit down for 2 hours or an hour and write, and just keep that for yourself. It's like building muscle. Like if you're going to be in a marathon, you just don't go into it. You have to train yourself.
Yeah.
And the same with writing or any creativity, you have to build into it. You'll find you'll write for an hour and then you want to write more, and you'll find the time to do it.
Wow. Well, that's very important guidelines. I think hopefully your book will provide a lot of creative permission for people to explore, whether it is writing poetry or doing any of the other creative expressive things, art, visuals, music, etc.
And yeah, to limit your Facebook time, your social media time. We all have to go in there, or you can't totally give it up.
Right.
But you just schedule yourself. Look at your email only like once a day, and like for 15 minutes, or spend a half hour with your social media, and that's it. It's kind of like making a date to like end it.
Well, that's good, right? It's sort of like putting up. We're not open now. Come back when we come back. When we're open. That's a very good way of managing that and keeping it sensible, because you see so many people who are just so addicted to their phones. They can't let it go.
That's right. Yeah.
For a moment.
Put it on mute for a while. And then I also go in the book, I also have a reference section where I talk about different libraries and bookstores that are poetry only.
Wow. Okay, that's a very valuable resource.
Writers' retreats that I've either been to or I've visited and had taken tours, and kind of giving a review of each one of those and what they're like.
Okay.
So people have a better impression of what these art and writing retreat centers are like.
Yeah. Do you have one that you've felt really helped you in particular, or is there?
There's a couple I could recommend. One of them is just closing now, but there's these others that I've been to called, one is Marble House Project, and they talk about different creativity. They'll take on dancers, musicians, poets, fiction writers, artists. They have artist studios there.
So those types of things encourage like sort of cross collaborations.
Exactly.
Like
So when I was there a couple of years ago, there were 10 people, and we were all had different genres of creativity, and we got along well, and it was wonderful to hear and to experience each other's crafts. There was a barn where we would have different performances every week, and we were there for 3 weeks.
Oh, wow.
All expenses paid, so I would, except getting there. So I would recommend anyone to apply to Marble House Project. There's also the Writers Colony at Dairy Hollow in Eureka Springs, Arkansas. That's a fabulous place, too.
Speaking of, I guess you mentioned when we were setting up for the interview that you actually made your earrings.
I did.
So I was going to say, you really are living the creative life in the sense that you what you wear and what you bring a lot to the table of being an artist.
And I talk about something like that in the book, about how you can decorate your apartment with your friends' artwork, and you help each other. You can buy their art, they can buy your books, or you could trade. You could find trade with other creative people, and you make your own jewelry, make your own clothes, if you're into that. There's things that you can do yourself that makes it makes it a lot more special than just going out and buying something.
No, and you've invested time and energy and essence into it, So it's not just.
And how to take advantage of happy hours after work and get free meals.
Okay. Well,
and save money.
I'd love to hear some more of your poems.
Well, I have, and I don't know if you can see this book, Omnivore Odes. It has kind of a matte cover. I don't think it's going to be shining. Poems about food, herbs, and spices. And the cover was by the photographer Stephen Foster, who's also a herbal expert in Eureka Springs,
Oh, okay.
Arkansas. And I will read a poem about beets, which is the cover
Okay.
poem. The Beet Attitudes. Old soul of vegetables, rooted to earth, breathy, veiny brilliance toward the sun. Beets holding fortitude even as far as the bottom of the vegetable bin. Strong as saints' hearts that can't be banished to hells of wilt and spoilage, to which greens so easily succumb. O naughty knights in dusty armor, loyal through centuries of cuisine, willing to shed blood on our behalf, or appear in disguise to coax us to try them for our own good, as pickles or in borscht. Sour cream blushes pink in its presence. Our fingers grow ruddy as they pass through our hands on way from sink to stove. We are compared to them when flushed with embarrassment. We lean on them for sweetness when cane crops topple in other parts of the world. They are redder than Christmas, more scarlet than sin, more deeply committed than any Valentine, hardier than most living things, and as reliable as death itself. It seems only the seasoned palate, which has tasted the bitter with the brisk, can fully reckon their earthly essence and crimson contribution to our cellars.
That's great. So do you eat a lot of beets, or?
I do, and my husband eats even more. He loves them.
Oh, wow.
So, and then we have roasted beets, and then we blend the raw beets in smoothies.
Oh my goodness.
And it's
Okay.
all very good
You don't
for
have to
you.
cook the beet in advance before you,
You don't.
use it in
You
a
can
smoothie?
you can use them raw or juice them.
Oh,
Yes.
okay.
Juice them.
So you have to use like a special, is that
Juicer.
a special juicer? Okay.
And then
All
you can
right.
actually put the juice in a smoothie if you'd like.
Okay.
Yes.
Wow. I had no idea. I've been a little scared of beets, but
They
have
do
to-
stain your hands a little bit.
Yes,
You maybe
yeah.
wear gloves.
But they do seem to be like in menus and
Yeah, they're
you know,
becoming
they've-
more popular.
right. They're having a little bit of a renaissance, like kale did a few years ago.
That's right.
You know, now everybody has kale, and kale is there. So you know, so the new thing must be the beets. Did you have another poem that you wanted to share, or was there something else you wanted to read?
Yeah, I have one about, I do a lot of urban gardening in our Chicago
neat.
garden. We have a very small plot of land. We have a 25-foot wide lot in Chicago, but we make the most of, my husband and I make the most of our backyard. And we compost our
Oh,
vegetables, and we
wow.
use
Okay.
that compost for our soil. And this is about our urban composter, which is
Okay.
kind of a round shape that you turn. I slowly spin it like a Ferris wheel. Our coffee grinds and eggshells, cucumber peels and avocado skins, limp celery chunkily chopped, grass clippings, dried leaves, dill stalks and parsley stems, dryer lint, corn cobs, paper towels, thrown in to break down in months, even weeks, to waste, rot, unravel, and release. A quick legislation that amends and upholds the backyard garden. I'm not an alderman or a mighty alder, just a worker, a compost carny, who straps them in as scraps, lets them sail around a few times, then bids them thank you very mulch as they hit the exit ramp, as carbon and nitrogen-rich soil, a hot summer joyride of wetness, corruption, and rotation. In these moments, I imitate the earth, that magician who cracks 2 eggs into his top hat and throws the shells in for good luck, covers it with the white silk scarf of winter, then whisks it away to pull out a bouquet of spring flowers. The earth revolves, embraces green, gold, scarlet, and brown, spent plants, cracked rocks, animal waste and bones of our ancestors that fall into its massive arms to whirl and self-heal, with leftovers that hold the earth together.
Oh, I love that. That is great. Well, you do seem to be very drawn to plants and gardening and food and I don't
And
know.
I have another food poem book in the works.
Oh, okay. What kind of foods is that about, or is that?
It's about more food, more drinks,
Okay.
more spices and herbs.
Will that be a
and-
chapbook or is it a full length?
It's a full-length book. Right now, I'm calling it Epicurean Ecstasy.
That
That's
sounds
the
great.
working title.
Okay, that sounds great. And I guess I lived in Chicago for a few years before the kids needed to go to school, and we had a garden in our backyard as well. But we didn't compost, and I remember my husband was like, well, we can't grow any vegetables that go deep into the soil because he was worried about maybe impurities that would still
Yeah,
be,
yeah,
because they
when-
talked about sort of some of the soil that the city of Chicago
Yeah, well,
may have some
it's
issues.
not only that. I think a lot of people do use pesticides in their gardens.
Oh,
So if
wow.
you buy a house from someone else,
True.
you have to wait 3 years
Oh, my
in order
goodness.
to really have organic soil and to keep adding organic
Yeah.
compost.
So now
and-
with the compost, do you feel you need to use pesticides and things
No, I
like that?
never do. I
Oh,
never use
okay.
them. I haven't used, and we've lived in our house a long time.
Wow,
And I weed
okay.
by hand and
Oh, wow.
even
okay.
pick bugs off by hand and all that fun stuff.
Right, but obviously, just the same mindful attention to whatever the task is, whether it's making earrings or, many of the tips that you talk about. It sounds like the gardening and the food. It's like the cycle of the compost. It gives you a mindful focus, and then it's also inspiring topics for your writing and.
It does, and I think when you grow your own vegetables, if you want to write poems about them,
Yeah.
getting to know what they're really like, and it's almost like if you focus on them so long, they begin to reveal, will reveal themselves to you. It's like,
I like
it's
that.
almost like they will speak to you.
Wow. So.
And I think that's true with anything.
Yeah.
Because when you pay attention, attention is love. And you give love to something and it will give you love back.
That's beautiful. I love
It's
that.
true. I found that's my
Right.
experience.
Wow. No, that's great. Well, and I imagine that when people reading this book and coming to hear you speak at Madame Zuzu's at the end of February.
I'm looking forward to Madame
Yes.
Zuzu's. Yes.
Yes. Oh.
February
We've got
24th.
a few more moments, so if you've got maybe one short poem to read as a wrap
I
up.
have one that's about champagne.
Okay.
Compost, turning vegetables into earth. This is about grapes into champagne. Found champagne poem in an unclaimed Wisconsin corner. 51 degrees champagne at the 42nd parallel. You pull a magnum from the plastic pail ice bucket. Foil and cage tossed aside to grasp the cork between thumb and forefinger. Then turn the bottle. Pop, sizzle, stars. Liquid plays flute as I pour Blanc de Noir for both of us, seated in our folding chairs. Shall we toast? To what today? Napoleon Bonaparte said of champagne, in victory, one deserves it. In defeat, one needs it. Though it's a day of neither defeat nor victory, but part of some other scaffolded demolition or yet ungrouted building block towards something we don't yet understand. The champagne happily chips away at it a little, the way its grapes chip at chalky hillsides northeast of Paris for nourishment, to later be crushed and create bottles full, fermented and aged. Yes, I found this poem like we found this special bottle marked down in the corner bin of the dusty liquor store. And now, at our card table outdoors, we breathe hillside air and swallow tiny bubbles of carbon dioxide. Am I, like you say, this half-hour's mermaid of the extra brute ether? Or you, my midnight prince of the prestige cuvée? Or merely both as simple as this Tuesday sparrow song night, yet still savvy enough to quote Dorothy Parker, 3 be the things I shall never attain: envy, content, and sufficient champagne.
That's fabulous. I love it. And great to tie in Dorothy Parker.